Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been coming at you with a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Web Development 1111 .NET Framework with Web Databases class. The main textbook for the class is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS by Lee Naylor. I have decided first to go over several chapters from ASP.NET MVC 5 by John Galloway of Microsoft and others. I am smack dab in the middle of Chapter 15. And I talked about extending models. Now it's time to talk about extending views and extending controllers. Views are the most common type of result returned from actions. We're used to that. All right. We have a view result, as our return type, and we return a view, typically, although we don't have to do that. A view is generally some kind of template with code inside to customize the output based on the model input. ASP.NET MVC ships with two view engines by default, the WebForms view engine and the Razor view engine. All right. As they mention here, an entire book could be written on the subject of writing a custom view engine, and perhaps says a dozen people would buy it. Well, again, what I believe the author is saying there is, yeah, you can do it, but it's not the kind of thing most people do. All right, writing a view engine from scratch is just not a task very many people will do. So this section is devoted to customizing the two view engines that ship with MVC. Those engines being the WebForms view engine and the Razor view engine. Both, as it says, derived from Build Manager view engine, which itself derives from Virtual Path Provider view engine. So that's the parent of this, which is the parent of these two. Both Build Manager and Virtual Path Providers are features inside of the core ASP.NET runtime. Again, very heavy stuff in here. The author gives some code and then a little bit of explanation. It's really not bad explanations, but the stuff in here is very, very complex. All right. Writing HTML helpers on page 444. You may or you may not remember, but we've talked about these before. As mentioned there, HTML helpers are methods that help you generate HTML inside your views. They're primarily written as extension methods to the HTML helper, AJAX helper, and/or URL helper classes, depending on what it is you're trying to generate. Extension methods are static methods in a static class that use the this keyword on their first parameter to tell the compiler which type they are providing the extension for. They give a very crude little example right there on the bottom of 444. When you write HTML helpers, as mentioned right here, that are generating HTML, it's almost always going to be the case that you want to return an HTML string rather than string, because you don't want the system to encode your HTML. This is even more important when using the Razor view engine, which only has a single output statement, and it always encodes. We've talked before, we had a whole chapter back in Chapter 7 where we talked about security. Writing Razor helpers, in addition to the HTML helper syntax that's been available since MVC 1, developers can also write Razor helpers in Razor syntax. This feature shipped as part of Web Pages 1.0 framework included in MVC apps. These helpers don't have access to the MVC helper objects or to the MVC context objects. They can get access to the core ASP.NET runtime intrinsic context objects through the traditional static ASP.NET API HTTP context.current. So what they're saying is it is possible to extend the model. It is possible to extend the views. All right. More likely than not, especially with views, you're not likely to go and write your own stuff. You're likely to extend, okay, either the forms view or the razor view. For more information on writing razor helpers, John Galloway has a blog out there that you can see that's listed on the bottom of page 445. The last part of the chapter is on extending controllers. You've heard this before, how controllers are the glue that pulls the project together. They communicate both with the models via the data access layers and also with the views. All right, so they decide how to respond. Is it going to be a view? Is it going to be some JSON? Is it going to be something else? Customizing how actions are selected and executed is an important part of MVC extensibility. ASP.NET MVC lets you influence how actions are selected for execution through two different mechanisms. The first is choosing action names with name selectors. As it says there, renaming an action is handled by attributes that derive from action name selector attributes. We've done a little bit of this, not too much. I'm not going to do any of it. The other thing that's here is filtering actions with method selectors. As it says there, a method selector is an attribute class that derives from the action method selector attribute. It involves a single abstract method responsible for inspecting the controller context and method and saying whether the method is eligible for the request. Filters, starting on the bottom of page 447. After an action method has been selected, the action is executed and it returns. If it returns a result, the result is then executed. Filters allow the developer to participate in the action and result execution in 5 ways. We've looked a little already at authentication and authorization, pre and post processing of actions, pre and post processing of results, and error handling. And there is yet a 6th type of filter, an override filter, that allows exceptions to the default set of global or controller filters. Filters can be written as attributes applied directly to action methods or controller classes, or as standalone classes that are registered in the global filter list. And they talk about each one of these. New to MVC5 are authentication filters to support custom authentication at the controller and action levels. We've talked about this before, where to authorize. We mentioned that you should be as granular with authorization as possible. All right. If with some sites, you want them basically to be, you always have to be logged in, except maybe when you're logging in. So you literally set the authorization up at the top of the site and then override it on an as-needed basis. Other times you can do most things anonymously, so you go down to the level where you actually need somebody to be registered, all right, be logged in, and you do it then. So there's a lot of stuff in here with authentication filters. I'm just going to jump all the way up till almost the end of the chapter here. I'm going to jump up about 6 pages to page 454, authorization filters. A developer might choose to implement an authorization filter to provide an early escape from the action pipeline when some precondition isn't properly met. So where you don't want to just return a 404, maybe you want a more, a different kind of error or whatever. Action and result filters. A filter that wants to participate in pre and post processing should implement the iAction filter interface. There's an example of this on the bottom of page 454 going on to page 455. Exception filters, as it says, exception filter is used to process exceptions that might be thrown during action or result execution. Developers often use these filters to perform some sort of logging of errors, notification of the system or to the system administrators, and choosing how to handle the error from the end user's perspective, typically by sending them to an error page. Filter overrides on 455 says it's new to MVC5 and a bit different from the others. Unlike the other filter types, override filters don't have any methods at all. Rather, they simply return a type of filter to override. It might be helpful not to think of filter overrides as normal filters at all. They're really more of a way to control when the other kinds of filters should apply. Again, just about finished here. Providing custom results. The final line of code in most action methods returns an action object. As a developer, you are not limited to the action results provided by the MVC framework. You can make your own action result by deriving it from the action result class and implementing an execution result. So to summarize this very brief look or foray into this stuff, this chapter was all on advanced stuff, way over my head, may or may not be over your head. They talked about how to extend models, how to extend views, and how to extend controllers. For models, as it says, they talked about the inner workings of value providers and model providers. For views, they talked about how to extend custom view engines to provide your own conventions about locating view files, as well as two variations of helper methods for generating HTML inside of your views. Then finally, they talked about how to extend controllers through the use of action selectors, filters, and custom action types. When I return, I will be going over the last chapter that I'm going to be going over, which is Chapter 16. Again, another thing on advanced topics. So again, it's some of the stuff that the authors mentioned earlier in the book and said we'll get to later. So we'll talk about that, and we'll get to that shortly.